The mysterious disappearance of two young Dutch tourists, Lisanne Froon and Kris Kremers, shocked Panama. They had traveled to the country with a clear objective: tourism and volunteer work. However, what was supposed to be an adventure turned into a puzzle that still intrigues many. The young women were last seen on the Pianista trail in Boquete, and this is where the mystery began. A photo taken before their disappearance and the discoveries made months later with the blue backpack changed the course of the story forever. The case became famous not only because of the story itself but also due to the evidence found, including the young women's camera and their last images. What really happened on that trail remains a mystery to this day. How did they end up on the trail, why did they disappear, and what happened right after the last photo was taken? These questions remain unanswered, and that fuels the speculation. The disappearance of Lisanne Froon and Kris Kremers is more than just a tragedy, it is a puzzle that challenges logic and remains unsolved. The photos, especially one of the most mysterious, photo 509, with its odd gap in the sequence, generated more questions than answers. The pressure from the families and investigators revealed clues that, at first, seemed inexplicable. Were the young women alone, or was there someone else with them? What did they try to capture before they disappeared? Lisanne Froon and Kris Kremers' story is a true blend of curiosity, mystery, and drama that keeps everyone on edge to this day. With its stunning landscapes, mountains, and beautiful trails, became the perfect destination for Lisanne Froon and Kris Kremers, who, along with other tourists, sought to experience new adventures. The country's natural beauty, with its rivers, mountains, and rainforests, promises an escape from routine but also hides certain dangers. The tranquility of Boquete, the small town where the young women arrived, contrasted with frequent warnings about the region's dangerous trails, which, even though a tourist spot, had recorded cases of disappearances and incidents involving tourists. Lisanne and Kris were young adventurers, 22 and 21 years old, recently graduated and with plans to spend 6 months on volunteer work in tourism. The nature of their travel was centered around immersion and connection with the local culture. Upon arriving in Panama, they already had an agenda of activities, but like many travelers, they decided to explore the country more on their own. The type of tourism they chose involved not only volunteer work but also the pursuit of adventure and challenges, like exploring the local trails. However, what should have been a positive experience soon took a tragic turn. Boquete, surrounded by the majestic Central Cordillera and with access to trails like El Pianista, seemed like the ideal place for that. However, what many people don't know is that, in addition to its natural beauty, the region also has its share of challenges. The young women, perhaps like many tourists, were drawn to the idea of adventure but were not fully aware of the risks. Their decision to explore the trail on a day off proved, tragically, riskier than they imagined, as, besides the beauty, the location was dangerous, and there were stories of robberies and even disappearances of tourists. That was when, unknowingly, Lisanne and Kris ventured into a mysterious territory. On April 1, 2014, Lisanne Froon and Kris Kremers arrived in the town of Boquete where they were preparing to start their volunteer work. Both were excited, eager to explore new cultures, and get involved in activities that would help the local community. However, like many tourists, they also wanted to enjoy their free time by exploring Panama and its natural beauty. They decided to explore the famous El Pianista trail, a popular route among adventurers, but one that hides dangers unknown to those unprepared. Despite warnings from locals and eyewitnesses, who cautioned about the dangerous nature of the trail, especially due to previous robberies in the area, the young women decided to go ahead. There seems to have been little preparation for what they would face. Their decision to cross the trail alone, without a guide, proved to be fatal. Lisanne's blue backpack, which would later be found with their belongings, such as phones and passports, was the only sign that they had ventured there. Also, the presence of a local dog, who accompanied them at the start of the journey and later returned alone, adds more mystery to the case. The fact that they carried essential items like water, food, and the camera indicates they were aware of the risk and tried to prepare for the long journey. Their decision to take on the trail, despite not being completely safe, seems to reflect the adventurous spirit of the young women. However, the circumstances of that trip placed them in an unexpected situation. What they didn't know is that this trail, initially inviting and full of natural beauty, would lead them to a dark fate, one that no one could have predicted. Topic 04. The initial search. When the young women did not return by the end of the afternoon on April 1st, a sense of worry began to spread. The woman who was hosting Lisanne and Kris soon noticed their absence and tried to contact them, but with no success. The following day, concerned, she alerted the local authorities, which began the search. However, the official search did not begin until 3 days after their disappearance, which caused a crucial delay. During this period, the young women's families in the Netherlands, who began to worry after the prolonged silence, took matters into their own hands, seeking answers directly from local friends and family. What followed were days of agonizing uncertainty. Helicopters flying over hard-to-reach areas, rescue groups traversing trails and rivers, trying to find any trace of Lisanne and Kris. The local community was increasingly involved, and the pressure on the authorities intensified with each passing day. The families of the young women traveled to Panama, bringing along a team of private detectives from the Netherlands in a desperate attempt to understand what had happened. The search began to involve many people from the local community, but despite the efforts, the disappearance remained unexplained. The searches intensified, but what truly caught attention was the fact that, despite all the effort, authorities couldn't find any solid clues. The lack of positive results only fueled the mystery and frustration of the families and friends. What had happened to the young women in that treacherous terrain? Why were there no clear signs of where they could be? The questions multiplied, and deep down, everyone knew time was running out to find answers. The search was far from over, and the mystery was beginning to take shape as a true tragedy. After 10 weeks of intensive searching with no significant results, something unexpected happened. A local woman, while walking along the banks of the Zanguinola River, found a backpack. Initially, it seemed like just another lost item, but upon closer inspection, she realized the backpack belonged to Lisanne and Kris. The confirmation came quickly, and it was soon known that the items found there belonged to the missing young women. The find sparked a mix of relief and more questions. How did the backpack end up there? And why was it so far from the trail where they disappeared? Inside the backpack, the local woman found personal items, including passports, phones, and other important belongings, but what caught the most attention was the camera. This item would become a key piece of evidence in the investigation, revealing mysterious clues. Among the most surprising discoveries were the 34 different fingerprints found on the objects and the backpack. This suggested that more people, besides Lisanne and Kris, had handled the items, raising the complexity of the case. Who else had access to the backpack? And why so many fingerprints? The mystery only deepened. The contents of the backpack provided few answers, but it opened new avenues for investigation. The discovery of the camera sparked a renewed hope of finding clues about what really happened. The fact that the find occurred in an area far from the trail only added more questions. How did the young women end up there? Were they alone, or was someone else with them? The backpack, which seemed to be the only physical link to the disappearance, would soon become the key to understanding the final moments of the young women and what led them to make such risky decisions. When investigating the camera found in the backpack, the authorities discovered a series of images that offered a disturbing glimpse of Lisanne and Kris's last moments. A sequence of photos indicated that the young women had reached the top of the trail and continued to climb, even after leaving the marked area. This not only reinforced the idea that they were on a risky journey, but it also raised an important question: why did they continue toward an unmarked area where few tourists ventured? The cameras seemed to hold the answers to an even greater mystery, but the images alone were not enough to unravel the full story. The mystery of Photo 509 became one of the most intriguing elements of the investigation. While the photo sequence went from 508 to 510, Photo 509 was missing, deleted, as if someone had intentionally erased that image. Attempts to recover the photo failed, leaving investigators with more questions. Why would someone, perhaps even the young women themselves, delete that photo? What could it have captured? The gap in the sequence fueled speculation. Perhaps it was a crucial image, possibly of something or someone in a critical situation, which the young women did not want or could not keep. Moreover, the 90 photos taken on the night of April 8, 7 days after the disappearance, showed disturbing images like rocks and an improvised mirror made from a potato chip can. But one photo in particular stood out, a photo zooming in on Kris's hair, where there seemed to be blood. What exactly happened that night? Were the nighttime photos a desperate attempt to ask for help, or were the young women using the camera's flash as an improvised lantern to light their way? The purpose of these images remains one of the greatest enigmas of the case. The cell phones found in Lisanne and Kris's backpack played a crucial role in the investigation. The first attempts to make emergency calls took place on the same day of their disappearance, April 1st, to the emergency numbers of the Netherlands, 112, and Panama, 911. This indicated that the young women, realizing they were in danger or lost, tried to call for help as quickly as possible. However, what followed was a series of failed attempts due to the lack of signal and issues completing the calls, which generated a growing sense of desperation. In the following days, the phones continued to register attempts to call the authorities, including several calls made between April 2nd and 6th. An important detail was that during this period, there were also attempts to unlock the phones, but with no success. This suggested that, possibly, the young women were in a situation where, in addition to fear and exhaustion, even the simple act of accessing the phone was becoming a challenge. But what happened to the phone batteries? Why couldn't they make more emergency calls? The last recorded use occurred on April 11, 10 days after the disappearance. Were they still alive and trying to communicate with the outside world, or were the young women simply trying to survive in an inhospitable environment? The absence of further records after this date only added more layers of uncertainty to the case. The discovery of the young women's remains came in July 2014, 4 months after their disappearance, bringing a tragic confirmation. Human bone fragments were found, along with a shoe containing Lisanne's foot and a pair of denim shorts, evidence that the young women had indeed been somewhere in the mountains. This news brought a mix of relief and sadness, as although there was finally confirmation of death, the mystery surrounding the circumstances of the death remained far from solved. The difference in the decomposition of the bodies, with Kris's remains being much cleaner and Lisanne's still containing fabric pieces, raised new questions. Why was the decomposition of the bodies so distinct? The analysis of the remains revealed no clear signs of violence or serious injuries, and the cause of death remained undetermined. There were no obvious signs of fractures or injuries caused by weapons, which was a huge surprise. For many, this seemed to suggest that the young women had died from natural causes or an accident, but this did not explain the mysterious disappearance, the strange photos, and the attempts to call the police. Why, then, did they stray from the trail? What happened before they reached that point? These questions remain unanswered. With the discovery of the remains and the analysis of the camera, new theories began to emerge. The official theory suggests an accident likely caused by a fall from a monkey bridge or another elevated point which would have caused fatal injuries. The river's current could have carried the bodies, explaining the lack of clear signs of violence. However, this explanation does not satisfy all the gaps in the case. An alternative theory is that Lisanne and Kris may have been victims of local criminals, possibly traffickers, who tried to rob them, resulting in violent death. The presence of several fingerprints on the young women's belongings fuels this hypothesis, as it would indicate that more people than just the victims handled their possessions. Despite the investigation officially closing in 2015, the case of Lisanne Froon and Kris Kremers still raises many doubts. Some believe that we will never know the full truth about the case. What do you think? Was it truly an accident? Or is there something darker behind it all? Share your thoughts in the comments and share this mystery with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more investigations like this and turn on notifications so you don't miss any details.